Welcome back, everyone. Week 15 of the Bluewater Auto Restoration Podcast. It's Saturday morning, so you know what that means.
Time for another deep dive.
Exactly. And this week we're going to be talking about how to best store your classic car for the winter.
You know winter's coming, and we need to make sure that we keep those classics protected.
Absolutely. And there's so many tips and tricks out there that it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a minefield, to be honest.
Where do you even start, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's where this deep dive comes in.
We've got all the best info from Bluewater Auto Restoration, and we're going to break it all down for you.
To help make sure your car comes out of storage in tip-top shape, ready for spring.
It's a little bit like prepping for, a long voyage. You wouldn't set sail without making sure that every system is checked and double-checked, right?
Yeah.
Same goes for your classic car. We need to address any potential issues now before they become bigger problems later.
Exactly. And you know what the first step is, perhaps a little bit surprisingly?
Is that?
A good old-fashioned wash and wax.
Oh, yeah. Always a good place to start.
I know what you might be thinking. Why bother washing a car that's just going to be sitting in the garage all winter?
It seems a bit counterintuitive.
But here's the thing. Things like water stains or, even bird droppings can actually damage your car's paint.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if you leave them over the whole winter.
Yeah, it can really edge into the paint.
You want to prevent even those microscopic little imperfections from becoming major headaches later on down the road.
So it's like removing all of those potential catalysts for corrosion or paint damage.
Exactly. And don't forget about the often neglected areas too, like the undercarriage, the wheel wells, all those nooks and crannies where grime can build up.
So we're not just talking about a quick rinse here. We need to thoroughly clean the car from top to bottom.
A good, deep clean.
Literally. And while we're on the subject of protection, let's talk about car covers.
Okay.
I'll admit, I used to think, if it's in the garage, it's safe. I don't need a car cover.
A lot of people think
But I've learned the hard way that even inside a garage, your car can be vulnerable to things like dust, accidental spills, even those little tiny scratches that seem to appear out of nowhere.
yeah, those are the worst.
So annoying.
A good quality car cover is going to act like a shield, deflecting all of those everyday hazards.
And when you say good quality, what do you mean?
Well, you want one that's breathable.
Yeah.
You don't want moisture getting trapped underneath and creating mold or mildew.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
It's about finding that balance between protection and ventilation.
Okay, so we've washed the car.
Yeah.
We've covered it up. Now let's move on to the hood.
Okay, let's do it.
I think most car enthusiasts have a little bit of anxiety about oil changes. Like, is it time? Is it not? When should I do it?
When it comes to storage, what's the magic number?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, think of it this way. Used oil is like a sponge. It absorbs all kinds of contaminants as your engine runs.
Like what kind of contaminants?
Things like microscopic metal particles, combustion byproducts, all that nasty stuff.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
And over time, these contaminants can turn into sludge.
Sludge.
Yeah, which can clog up your engine's vital arteries.
So basically, if you're storing your car for more than 30 days, it's a good idea to get an oil change before you put it away for the winter.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like giving your engine a fresh start for the new season, flushing out all of those impurities.
Makes sense. And, Bluewater Auto Restoration also recommends checking your transmission fluid as well.
Yeah, if it's due for a change, winter storage is the perfect time to do that.
It's all about preventative maintenance, right?
Absolutely. Those fluids are the lifeblood of your car, and keeping them fresh is going to ensure smooth sailing when you're ready to hit the road again.
Okay, so now let's move on to a topic that always seems to cause a lot of debate in the car world. The fuel tank.
Oh, yeah. To fill or not to fill that is the question.
What's the Bluewater philosophy on that?
A full tank is the way to go.
Okay.
And there's good science behind it. Filling the tank minimizes the airspace inside, which reduces the chance of condensation forming. And as we know, condensation leads to moisture. And moisture is the enemy of metal, especially inside your fuel tank.
So it can lead to rust.
Exactly, which
Wow.
can then contaminate your whole fuel system.
So it's not just about making sure you have enough gas for that first spring drive. It's about protecting the whole fuel system.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think there's another layer to this too, right? Fuel stabilizer.
Oh, yeah, you got it. Especially with modern gasoline containing ethanol, which tends to break down over time.
Break down how?
Well, it can get all gummy and can varnish up your fuel lines and injectors.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah, so fuel stabilizer prevents that from happening. It's like a preservative for your fuel, making sure it stays fresh even after months of just sitting there.
Okay, so a full tank plus stabilizer equals a happy and healthy fuel system all winter long.
Exactly.
And a good quality stabilizer should last for about 12 months, right?
That's right. It's a small investment that can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Okay, so we've taken care of the exterior, the fluids, the fuel. What's next on our winterizing checklist?
Well, let's move on to another vital fluid, the coolant in your radiator.
Okay.
Even though your engine's not going to be running, you still want to make sure it's protected from those freezing temperatures.
Right, a frozen engine block is definitely something we want to avoid.
Absolutely.
So we're continuing with this theme of fresh fluids. If you're due for a radiator flush, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, for sure. But even if you're not doing a full flush, you still need to check the freezing point of your existing coolant.
How do you do that?
Well, you can use a tool called a hydrometer.
A hydrometer.
Yeah, or you can pick up some test strips from your local auto parts store.
Okay, and those will tell you if your coolant is providing enough protection against freezing.
Exactly.
Okay, so a hydrometer or test strips. I'm adding those to my shopping list. Now let's talk about something that is a personal pet peeve of mine, dealing with the car battery after it's been in storage all winter.
Ugh. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I hate having to reset all my radio presets and the clock.
Yeah, it's so annoying.
So what's the best approach here?
Well, there are a couple of options, each with its own pros and cons.
Okay.
The simplest is to disconnect the battery.
You mean completely disconnect it?
Yeah, starting with the negative cable first for safety reasons.
Okay, and why do we do that?
Well, this eliminates any parasitic drain that can slowly drain your battery over time.
So disconnecting the battery is the foolproof way to prevent a dead battery, but then I have to reset all my settings.
Yeah, that's the trade-off.
Okay, well, what's the other option?
If you want to keep your settings and have your car ready to go at a moment's notice, you can use a trickle charger.
Okay, tell me more about those.
You can think of it as a mini life support system for your battery.
Yo.
It delivers a low, steady current, just enough to keep the battery topped up without overcharging it.
And how do you use it?
You just clamp one end onto your battery terminals and plug the other end into a wall outlet.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But before everyone runs out to buy a trickle charger, I do remember a safety note from Bluewater Auto Restoration about these.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's important. We can't overlook safety. While trickle chargers are generally safe, there have been some rare instances of them causing fires.
Oh, wow.
So never use a trickle charger if you're storing your car off-site, somewhere where you can't keep an eye on it.
Okay, that's really good advice. Safety should always be our top priority. So we've prepped the fluids, we've dealt with the battery, our car's all snug under its breathable cover.
Sounds good so far.
Is there anything else we need to think about?
This one might surprise you. It's about the parking brake.
The parking brake.
Yeah, you actually don't want to use it for long-term storage.
Really? Why not?
Well, if you leave your parking brake engaged for a long time, the brake pads can fuse to the rotors.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
It's like they get a little too friendly, and then separating them in the spring can be a real pain.
So what do we do instead to make sure the car doesn't roll away?
Simple. Tire chocks.
Tire chocks.
Yeah, they're cheap, easy to use, and they eliminate that risk of your brake pads fusing.
Tire chocks, the unsung heroes of winter car storage.
Ah.
And speaking of tires, I know there's always that worry about flat spots developing over the winter.
Yeah. Is that a legitimate concern, or is it just an old wives' tale?
Well, I'm not sure, but I've definitely heard people talk about it.
Well, flat spots are definitely real, and cold weather can make the problem even worse.
Oh, really?
Especially if you have high-performance tires with a low profile. It's all about prolonged pressure on one specific area of the tire.
Like if you were to lean on a foam cushion for a long time, it would eventually retain that indentation.
Exactly the same thing happens to your tires.
Okay, so what can we do to prevent that from happening to our classic car?
Bluewater Auto Restoration suggests a couple of options depending on, how much effort you want to put in and what your storage space is like.
Okay.
The first option, which is a bit more involved, is to lift the car and put it on jack stands.
At all four corners.
Yeah. That way you're completely removing the weight from the tires.
Okay, but are there any downsides to doing that?
Well, some people say that leaving a car on jack stands for a long time can put stress on the suspension components.
Okay.
And of course, there's the safety factor. If there was a fire in your garage, you wouldn't be able to move your car quickly if it was up on stands.
That's a good point. So what's the alternative if I don't want to use jack stands?
You can overinflate your tires slightly just by a couple of PSI.
Okay.
And you can also place plywood sheets under each tire instead of letting them sit directly on the cold concrete.
And what did that do?
This helps to distribute the weight more evenly, and it creates a little bit of insulation.
Okay, so those are some good options.
Mhm.
So our car is washed, covered fluids are topped up or changed, the battery is taken care of, the parking brake is up, tires are protected. It's starting to feel like we're winning this winterization battle.
We're getting there.
But I have a feeling there's one last, often overlooked threat lurking in the shadows, one that can really cause a lot of damage.
You're talking about rodents, aren't you?
Ugh, yes. Those cute little creatures can wreak havoc on a classic car.
Oh yeah, they can cause so much damage.
I've heard horror stories about chewed wiring harnesses, nests, built-in air vents, insulation shredded to bits. It's scary.
It's a nightmare.
But luckily, Bluewater Auto Restoration has some pretty clever strategies for keeping those furry fiends at bay.
Yeah, they've got some good tips.
So what's the first line of defense?
Well, you need to identify and seal up any potential entry points.
Like where?
Things like the exhaust pipe, the air intake, any gaps or cracks in your garage walls.
Oh, right, I see.
Steel wool works really well for this. Rodents hate the texture and they have a really hard time chewing through it.
So we're basically creating a fortress, blocking off any potential rodent invasion risks.
Exactly.
But what about deterrence? How do we make our car less appealing to these unwelcome guests?
Well, this is where things get interesting. Bluewater recommends taking a sensory approach.
The sensory approach.
Yeah, you can scatter scented dryer sheets inside the car.
Yes.
Or, and this is a new one for me, you can sprinkle Irish Spring soap shavings around. Yeah, apparently rodents hate those scents.
It's like we're creating an invisible force field of smells they can't stand.
Exactly.
And what about mothballs? Are those still a good option?
Yeah, mothballs are a classic deterrent. You can scatter them around the perimeter of your vehicle.
Okay, but I do want to remind everyone to check those traps regularly.
Oh yeah, for sure. Not only for effectiveness, but also for humane reasons.
Okay, so we've covered 9 tips so far, and I'm feeling pretty good about our winterization game plan.
Yeah, me too.
But I think there's one final crucial piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet.
What's that?
Insurance.
Ah, yes, of course.
It's tempting to think about, suspending your car insurance while your car's in storage to save a little bit of money.
Yeah, especially during the winter months.
But I suspect that might not be the best idea.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that even inside a garage, your car isn't immune to things like fires, roof collapses, theft. All those things are still possibilities.
And if you've canceled your insurance, you're going to have to pay for all of that out of pocket.
Exactly.
So what's the best course of action?
Well, if you have a classic car insurance policy, you're probably already covered for winter storage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those policies typically factor in the off-season as part of the annual premium. But it's always a good idea to double-check your specific policy just to be sure.
Okay, good to know. So it's all about that peace of mind knowing that even when your car is tucked away for the winter, it's still protected.
Exactly.
So that wraps up Bluewater Auto Restoration's 10 tips for winter car storage.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how much goes into properly storing a classic car for winter.
It's definitely more than just parking it and forgetting about it.
It's about being proactive, paying attention to detail, and, maybe even being a little bit clever to outsmart those rodents.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we start daydreaming about cruising with the top down in the spring, I have a question for our listeners to think about.
Okay, I'm all ears.
We've talked a lot about prepping the car for storage, but what about prepping your garage? Is your garage as ready for winter as your classic car?
That's a great question. The environment where you store your car is just as important as the car itself.
Exactly. We need to think about things like temperature, humidity, security.
All those factors that can impact your car even when it's not being driven.
So we'll leave you to ponder that final thought, and we'd love to hear your own tips and tricks for prepping your garage for winter storage. Share them in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going.
Sounds good.
Remember, new deep dives every Saturday, so be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode.
Can't wait.
Until then, happy winterizing.
Yeah, take care, everyone. You know what's funny? We spend all this time talking about how to prep the car for storage.
Right.
But we often forget about the space where the car is actually going to be spending all those months.
Yeah, it's like getting ready for a house guest. You wouldn't just clean the guest room and ignore the rest of the house.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the garage itself and how to prep that for winter car storage.
Okay, sounds good. What's the first thing we should think about?
Well, I think the first thing is just basic cleanliness. A good sweep declutter can make a big difference.
Okay.
You want to get rid of anything that could be a fire hazard, things like
Mm.
oily rags, stacks of old newspapers, anything flammable, really.
Yeah, it's amazing how much stuff can accumulate in the garage.
Oh, I know. And winter storage is a great excuse to finally tackle all that clutter and make your garage a safer space for your car.
So true. And while we're at it, we should probably take a look for any potential rodent entry points.
Oh, yeah, definitely good point.
Seal up any cracks or gaps we find.
You don't want to give those little critters any easy access.
A well-sealed garage is a rodent-resistant garage.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about physical clutter, but what about things like temperature and humidity?
Oh, yeah. Do those play a role in protecting our cars over the winter?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ideally, you want a cool, dry, and well-ventilated garage. Extreme temperatures can really damage a car's finish, and interior and humidity can lead to rust and mildew.
So we're trying to create a stable environment.
Yeah.
Not too hot, not too cold, and definitely not too damp.
Exactly. Aim for a temperature range between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit if you can, and make sure you have good ventilation to prevent that stagnant, musty air.
Good tips. Now, what if our garage isn't naturally climate controlled? Can we do anything about that?
Yeah, there are definitely things you can do. Insulation is a good place to start.
Okay.
Adding insulation to the walls and ceiling can help to regulate those temperature swings.
It's like giving our garage a cozy winter coat.
Exactly. And if you're dealing with humidity, a dehumidifier can be a lifesaver.
How does that help?
It basically sucks the moisture out of the air and creates a drier environment.
So we're creating a microclimate within the garage.
Exactly. Cool, dry, stable. Perfect for a classic car.
Sounds like a pretty nice place to spend the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just as important as the physical environment, we also need to think about security.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Especially if we're storing a valuable classic car.
Absolutely. So start with the basics. Make sure all your doors and windows are securely locked.
Okay.
And you might want to consider investing in a good, sturdy deadbolt for the main garage door.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
Are there any other things we can do?
You can also add security bars or, that shatterproof film to your windows.
That's a good idea. It's like an extra layer of protection.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about more high-tech security measures? Are there any gadgets that can help us keep an eye on things remotely?
Well, security cameras are becoming really affordable these days.
That's true.
And a lot of them are super user-friendly.
You can install them inside and outside the garage.
Yeah, and a lot of systems let you monitor the live feed from your phone or computer.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. It's like having a virtual watchdog.
Exactly. And you can even set up motion detectors that will alert you if there's any unusual activity.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, so we've talked about cleanliness, climate control, and security.
What else is...
I think there's one more thing that's really important when it comes to prepping our garage for winter car storage.
What's that?
Fire safety.
Oh, yeah, good point. We talked about eliminating fire hazards, but what about early detection?
Exactly.
Well, this is where smart home technology can really come in handy.
Okay.
You know those smart smoke detectors?
Yeah.
They can not only sound an alarm in the garage, but they can also send alerts to your phone, even if you're miles away.
Wow, that's so smart.
I know, right? And some systems can even be integrated with smart sprinkler systems.
Really?
Yeah, so they can automatically activate if there's a fire.
That's amazing. It's like having a virtual fire crew on standby.
Exactly. That kind of protection can make a huge difference in minimizing damage and, keeping your classic car safe.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here today, from basic cleanliness and climate control to, these high-tech security measures and smart home integration.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. But it's clear that prepping the garage is just as important as prepping the car itself.
Yeah, it's all about creating a safe, secure, and stable environment for your car to spend the winter.
So that it can hibernate peacefully until spring.
Exactly. Now, every garage is different.
Right.
So the specific steps you'll need to take to winterize your space will depend on your own individual needs.
And your circumstances.
But by being proactive and, taking the time to think about potential risks and putting preventative measures in place, you can ensure that your classic car comes out of storage in top condition.
I love that image of a classic car emerging from its winter slumber, all refreshed and ready to roll.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It reminds us that winter storage is just a pause.
Yeah.
A time for rest and rejuvenation.
Exactly.
But before we get too carried away with dreams of spring cruising,
Yeah.
there's one more aspect of winter car care that I think we need to address.
What's that?
The emotional side.
Oh, yeah. The heartache of saying goodbye to our beloved cars for a few months.
Exactly. It's not always easy to park that beauty in the garage and walk away knowing you won't be seeing it much for a while.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
For a lot of people, their classic car is more than just a car. It's an extension of their personality.
It's a source of pride and joy.
Absolutely. So the transition into winter storage can be a bit emotional.
It can be tough.
Hmm.
So how do we make that transition a little bit easier? Any tips?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge those feelings of sadness or loss.
Okay.
Don't try to suppress them.
Right.
Instead, channel that energy into some positive action.
Like what?
Well, before you put your car away, spend some quality time with it.
Okay.
Give it a final wash and wax. Take it for one last spin. Maybe even take some photos.
I love that. It's a way of saying goodbye with love and appreciation.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even though our cars might be tucked away for a few months, our passion for them doesn't go away.
Yeah, and in fact, the anticipation of that first spring drive can actually make the winter months go by faster.
It's something to look forward to.
Definitely. And in the meantime, you can use the off-season to plan for future adventures, research some restoration projects, or just connect with other car enthusiasts.
Yeah, the car community is such a great source of support and camaraderie, especially during the winter months.
For sure. It's a great way to stay connected to your passion.
I love that idea of using the off-season for planning and connecting with others.
Yeah, it's a way to keep that passion alive even when our cars are hibernating.
Exactly. Winter storage doesn't have to be a sad time. It can be an opportunity for reflection, for planning, for connection.
It's a chance to recharge our batteries, both literally and figuratively.
So that we're ready to hit the road running when spring arrives.
Well said.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We spend all this time making sure our classic cars are protected from the elements, the weather pests, even just time itself.
Yeah, it's like we're these guardians shielding these automotive treasures, making sure they're preserved for future generations.
Exactly. But, there's another layer of preservation that we often forget about. One that goes beyond just the physical car.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm talking about preserving the stories.
Yeah.
The history, the human connection that these cars represent.
Ah, I see what you mean.
These cars, they're not just machines, they're time capsules,
Yeah.
Rolling pieces of history. They've seen it, all the changing fashions, the evolving technology, countless personal journeys.
And those stories are just as precious as the cars themselves.
Exactly. Every dent, every scratch, every little imperfection tells a tale. It's a mark of character,
Yeah.
A reminder of a life lived on the road.
It's our responsibility to preserve not just the car, but also the stories that come with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure that those stories don't fade away?
Well, it starts with documentation.
Hmm.
Gather any information you can about your car's history.
Like what kind of information?
Old photos, registration documents, maintenance records, even just stories from previous owners.
Oh, yeah, like anecdotes and stuff?
Exactly. Put it all together, in a file, a scrapbook, a digital archive, whatever works for you.
So it's like a family history, but for your car.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about the facts and figures, it's about capturing the emotions, the memories that are tied to the car.
Right, because a car is more than just a machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So write those stories down, record them, make audio recordings, film video interviews, talk to anyone who has a connection to the car family members, previous owners, mechanics.
Capture those memories.
Yes. Those personal narratives really bring the history to life.
It would be so cool to pass down not just a classic car, but also a collection of stories about it.
It would be like a treasure chest filled with memories.
And, those stories don't have to be these epic tales of cross-country road trips or anything like that.
Right. Sometimes the most meaningful stories are the everyday moments.
The Sunday drives the family vacations.
Even just tinkering in the garage with a loved one.
Those are the memories that really stick with us.
Exactly. And by preserving those stories, we're ensuring that the legacy of these cars lives on.
It's not just about keeping them in museums or private collections. It's about keeping their spirit alive.
Well said.
So I think that's a really beautiful thought to end on. The true value of these classic cars isn't just about their monetary worth or their mechanical brilliance. It's about the stories they tell, the emotions they evoke, and the connections they forge.
They're a testament to human creativity and ingenuity and a love for the open road.
Absolutely. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into winter car storage.
Yeah, I think we covered everything.
From the practical tips to the emotional side of things.
It's been a real pleasure exploring all of this with you.
Me too. And as always, we want to hear from you, our listeners.
Yes. Share your own stories, your tips, your insights.
Let's keep this conversation going.
Because the world of classic cars is so much richer when we share our passion with each other.
Absolutely. So until next Saturday, may your winter storage be safe and sound, and may your passion for classic cars continue to burn bright.
Well said. Happy motoring, everyone.
See you next week.